Hi everybody and welcome to Bookies. I'm Bear. Just a little update on the channel. What I'd like to do with this channel is if we could get to 1,000 subscribers, YouTube will monetize this channel. And what I'd like to do is take the money from that and dedicate it to local libraries and literacy programs, both where I'm from and where I'm coming to you from, and also some of yours as well. So if you're on board with that, and you find these videos at least tolerable, like and subscribe. Hit that little thumbs up button down there. So today we're going to talk about Fahrenheit 451, which is written by Ray Bradbury, and the novel was published in 1953. I think its message is as relevant today as it was back in 1953. This novel is part of the curriculum in most high school honors AP classes. It wasn't when I was in AP English in high school, but all of my kids read Fahrenheit 451. They all loved it. So I figured, I should read this book and see what it has to say. Just one small note of pride. The building that you saw in the introduction of this video is the Powell Library Building at UCLA. And when I was an undergraduate at UCLA, that's where I worked. So it gives me a really nice feeling that when I was down in the stacks reshelving books and stuff like that, Ray Bradbury had, decades before, been typing away on a typewriter, writing Fahrenheit 451. I think in reviewing this novel, I don't want to make the mistake that a lot of other people make, and that is they want to talk about Bradbury's vision set forth in this novel, his vision of the future and how it has come or is coming true in our own time. We should get to that and we should talk about it because it is very important. However, the fundamental question in any book review is it worth your time reading it? And so we're going to talk about that first. One of the interesting things about this novel is our main character is a fireman. And in the future, in Bradbury's future, firemen don't put out fires. They start them for the purpose of burning books. Our main character's name is Montag, and he's home one evening and he meets a neighbor girl named Clarice McClellan. And the interesting thing about Clarice McClellan is she's full of free-thinking thoughts and ideas, things of that nature, which are considered at that time rather subversive. It's not necessarily the content of the things that she's thinking, but that she's thinking at all. So one night, a guy overhears Clarice and her family talking about how society is becoming illiterate. And this causes Guy to have all these kind of subversive thoughts in his mind. And he starts to become disillusioned with his role in censoring literature and destroying knowledge. In the following days, Montag and his fellow firemen are called to go burn a home. And they show up to the home, they douse the insides of it with kerosene, and they're about to light the match from the outside. And an old woman appears, and she does it herself. She'd rather burn herself alive than witness the destruction of the books in her home. And in the smoldering ruins, Guy finds a book, and instead of turning it over or burning it, he hides it in his uniform and he takes it home. He's trying to convince himself in his own mind that he's doing the right thing. He's doing a public service by burning these books, because that's what the public wants. But to disassociate himself from that woman burning herself and his involvement in her death, he starts to think of his hands as his hands are essentially doing what his mind doesn't want to do. His hands are doing the duty, even though his mind is reluctant. And I found that really interesting, how he really has to now start to disassociate himself from the evil that he's doing. With all these thoughts in his head, Guy tries to talk to his wife, Mildred, about whether it's right to suppress thought. She doesn't want to talk to him about that because she's too preoccupied by the social media that she's seen in her media room on 3 of the 4 walls. She complains to him that she really needs that 4th wall filled so she can watch even more of the social media. This form of entertainment that is provided by the government is so superficial that Mildred can't even recall what she's seen. But according to Mildred and her friends, this is their version of happiness. being entertained superficially and just stimulating the mind superficially, that they can't even have substantive thoughts. Nonetheless, that's happiness for them. Having been disappointed in his efforts to try to talk to his wife, Montag calls in sick, and he kind of wants to process his thoughts alone. And he's got the book with him, and it's under his pillow. And his boss, Captain Beatty, shows up. Beatty recounts the history of how firemen were adapted from putting out fire to actually burning homes with books in them. He says that books just lost their value when new technology came along, like TV and film. And those technologies accommodated the people's desire for things that would require a shorter attention span. Because homes were essentially built now with new technology to where they were fireproof, the firemen weren't really needed to put out fires. They became officers dedicated to preserving public peace. Specifically, officers were to destroy books because they caused confusing and destructive thoughts. They complicated people's lives. In this respect, suppression of thought is considered a benevolent aspect of securing public happiness. The people want it, and the firemen are there to secure their happiness. So Montag is hiding this book under his pillow, and Captain Beatty does notice it, but he doesn't call him out. He kind of speaks obliquely around the issue and basically saying that, hey, I've read some books in my time, and I had a library, but, kind of know your enemy thing. So I understand that some firemen may have a natural curiosity, but it is their public duty to turn any book that may come into their possession into the authorities. Beatty starts to tell Montag about the history of how society got to where it is today. He talks about how society is now turning out more men and women who have job functions to suppress thought than they do intellectuals. As a matter of fact, intellectual is a dirty word. It's a slur in current society. He describes this as natural. After all, wasn't it the smart kid that was always raising his hand and giving the answers to the teacher's questions, the one you wanted to beat up? It's natural to suppress intellectuals. Beatty tries to convince Montag that we all must be alike. We can't have intellectuals. He says that not everyone is born free and equal, as the Constitution says, but everyone must be made equal by the great leveler, the government. Each man must become the image of the other, and in doing this, all men are equal. After all, who would want to be the target of a well-read man? You see, in Bradbury's vision of the future, the firemen are the custodians of our peace of mind, the focus of the rightful dread that people have of being thought of as inferior. You see, the beauty of fire is that it destroys responsibility and consequences. If it bothers you, just throw it in the fire. After all, it's better to eliminate those who ask the question of why, instead of doing what they're told. What they need in society is more people who do what they're told and simply ask the question of how. So as the novel progressed, Montag reads several more books, and he turns over one book to Beatty, the book that he hopes Beatty thinks was the one that was under his pillow, in the hopes that Beatty will believe that he's a good citizen and that he's kind of got over his little questioning phase. So he goes to work, an alarm sounds, and so guess what? The location of the fire is going to be Montag's home. Beatty explains to Montag that it was his wife and her friends that turned him in. So Montag arrives at his home and he sees his wife, and she's really distraught about the loss of her media room. And she barely even acknowledges that Montag is there. And so Montag burns his own home. But as this is occurring, Beatty starts to taunt him, and Montag turns the flamethrower on Beatty. And then Bradbury describes an attempt at a great escape by Montag. How Montag flees, whether he escapes, and what happens if he does escape, I'm actually going to leave to you to find out when you read the novel. You know, it's always a little difficult doing a book review of a classic novel. Most people, I think, are generally familiar with the big brother idea behind this novel. They understand that there's a basic theme and that Bradbury may have been a little bit prophetic in writing this novel. And so I wanted to get you a little bit further along the novel just so we can explain the themes, but the remainder of the plot, I want to leave to you to discover for yourself. So, did I like the novel? Yeah, I actually loved it. I like to do pros and cons with any novel. I can't think of any cons with this novel. It's all pros. Bradbury's prose is powerful. I mean, it's very descriptive. It avoids any kind of flowery language because that doesn't really fit in a dystopian future where books are suppressed. It's so well written. Now let's talk about the importance of the novel itself. You have to read this novel. It's incredibly important. Why? For one, Bradbury is describing a future societal change impacted by technology. What are the consequences of people that get their information from technology and they don't really have any education? It's a society where sensation substitutes for thought. I think you and I, as book readers, maybe we're not as much subject to the danger of over-entertainment in lieu of substantive thought, but we all know people who can't watch a full YouTube video, like this one, for example. They'll want to switch off. They'll want to go watch another video. They start watching the other video. 3 minutes in, they switch off to that. Or maybe they just want to watch shorts or TikToks. And the problem is none of that really engages your mind. It might spark a thought in your mind, and then you've lost that thought because you moved on to the next short form media. You get a surface idea, but you don't actually sit and grapple with the substance of the matter. That's the danger with technology, and Bradbury saw it. I think the next theme that Bradbury really picks up on is what happens when the citizenry lacks education and critical thinking skills. They become complacent. They substitute knowledge and truth for entertainment. The interesting thing about Bradbury is the government wasn't the impetus for change in the novel. The people themselves were. So as the people got more engaged with media and they started thinking of books as old technology, and then they started thinking of books as kind of proposing uncomfortable ideas that they really didn't want to grapple with. It was the people that called for the suppression of books, and the government just came in and filled that void. I think we can see a little bit of this in our current society. And consider how many people you know that distrust higher education because, they heard something on the radio that essentially has convinced them that all institutions of higher learning all they're doing is turning your kids into progressives and liberals. And of course, that wasn't my experience at all. I didn't have a single professor trying to convince me of any progressive ideal when I was at UCLA or in law school. And certainly not my experience. It hasn't been the experience of any of the other people I know that went to college. And frankly, I lean conservative. I didn't get quote unquote turned. You learn critical thinking skills, but the underlying notion out there amongst a lot of people in this country is that it would be better to suppress institutions of higher learning than to permit them to continue to, quote unquote, churn out progressives and liberals. I mean, we have to give people some credit for being able to think, right? I mean, these are people in their low 20s. I don't think they're like brainwashed idiots. You can't brainwash somebody that's 22 years old like you might be able to a 5-year-old. So I don't think anybody's being programmed to have progressive thoughts. Nobody ever demanded that of me. But to get away from my own experience, the only reason I'm raising this issue is because it is current in our society, and Bradbury saw it. Bradbury saw how a popular thought could take over the citizenry, and then the suppression occurs afterwards because the government is giving the people actually what they want. I think the other point that Bradbury is making is he's illustrating how quickly people in democracies are willing to sacrifice their own freedoms, in particular freedom of speech. And they do this because they hear things that are offensive and they don't want to hear those offensive things. And so ultimately, they start calling for that offensive speech to be suppressed. The problem is history is always moving forward. Society is always changing. So those people that you want to have their thoughts suppressed, ultimately someday, many of them will come into power. And then guess what? They've learned from you, and now your thought is being suppressed. And that's a huge danger, and it's something that we always have to be aware of. Bradbury saw it. It's going on now. And we have to be aware as readers of this book and what Bradbury is teaching us that we can't let that genie out of the bottle. We have to avoid suppression of speech due to the content of what somebody is saying. Listen, I practiced constitutional law for 25 years and gave advice to governmental authorities the whole time. And I've seen this happen on a more local level, where some people are saying some things at a public location that the politician doesn't like. And my advice to them always is never move to suppress speech you disagree with. The best remedy for offensive speech is for you to speak power to truth. That is the remedy to speech that you disagree with. Let the marketplace of ideas sort out the good from the bad. And you can engage with that offensive speech. You can argue against it. That's the best remedy. So I think Bradbury's giving us a twofold lesson. If we don't learn from this novel, we could lose our freedom. And the worst part of loss of freedom is that we might actually desire it. And once society gets to that tipping point, we're lost. Incredibly important statement by Bradbury. This novel is so well written. It's short, a couple days, you'll get through it. You're going to learn a lot. You'll be entertained by the novel. And for all those reasons, I'm giving it 4.75 stars out of 5. Please read this novel. Have a great day.